All right? Is that better? Can you hear me now? Yes. Oh, good. I could be on TV. Oh, wait, we are on TV. I could do ads. All right, everybody. So I'm so glad you stayed. I know that this doesn't sound like the most exciting thing possible, and I'm trying to be 6 feet away so I can take the mask off. So is this comfortable am I far enough away to be comfortable for you if I take off my mask? We have varying levels of COVID caution in the congregation, and I want everyone to feel as comfortable as possible. So if you are joining us on the live stream, I don't know if you are. I'm actually not on it at the moment, and I should get there. Sorry while I do that. Okay. There's 11 folks I see on the live stream. Maybe there's more than that. There's 11 in the chat. If you want to ask questions or offer feedback, you'll need to be in the chat because I can't hear you any other way. If you were on the Zoom watch party, apparently there's an extra button to push to get sound. So we will have that next week, I promise. Most of our watch party left because there was no sound, because Zoom makes it hard. So this gathering is one of a few that we've planned through the Reconciling Task Force. Given that much of the brouhaha in the United Methodist Church right now is over human sexuality, that seemed like a good place to sort of locate our work. So that's why it says the Reconciling Task Force brings you this. I'm just going to go a little bit through how the United Methodist Church is organized, because that gets us to why one big meeting decides such big things. And then I'm going to talk about General Conference, which is that big legislative meeting, and then a little bit about what's in front of us. And, if you need to go. Don't feel weird about it. At some point, I will get all this condensed in a way that I can hand out to people. But anyway, let me just take you through this a little bit at a time. If you have a question, ask. If you're on the chat and have a question, ask. And we'll see if we can get some information out. For me, this is extremely important. I've been a delegate to General Conference since 2008. And so the work of General Conference is of huge importance to me. Let me just start with a primer on United Methodist Organization. We are not called Methodists for nothing. We have a method for everything. And so John Wesley was not just a great preacher, he was an organizational genius. So we are arranged as the basic unit of the United Methodist Church is the local congregation. Central United Methodist Church and congregations like it all over the world, that is the basic unit of the United Methodist Church. Everything happens through the local church. Local churches are arranged and organized geographically across the world. So every local church is part of a district, a regional district. So we're in the Binghamton district with about 40 other churches. We have a district superintendent who oversees the running of the churches and supervises the pastors on the district. And Carol, you don't have to, I hope you don't feel like you have to stay, right? You're not, okay. We can tidy up later. So the districts are arranged into what we call an annual conference, which is both a geography and a meeting. So our annual conference is Upper New York Annual Conference, and we are pretty much everything over to Greene and Columbia County and north and west. So everything but downstate is the Upper New York Annual Conference. We were formed as that about 12 years ago. as a merger of several former conferences. This church was in the former Wyoming Conference, which has nothing to do with cowboys in the West, except by giving it its name. Was a member of the former Troy Conference, and there was North Central New York and Western New York conferences came together as one 12 years ago to be the Upper New York Annual Conference. Every annual conference is part of a larger region known as a jurisdictional conference. So we are part of the Northeast jurisdiction with 9 other conferences throughout the Northeast. And we stretch down to West Virginia. New York is the farthest west, up to Maine. All of New England are in the Northeast jurisdiction. These are important, I promise. The jurisdictional conference is the body that elects bishops. So our bishops are elected for life, and they are done at the regional conferences. And then all the jurisdictional conferences and central conferences. So annual conferences are all part of a jurisdictional conference or a central conference. Elsewhere in the world, they're called central conferences. The jurisdictions are here in the U.S. Okay? That makes sense? Sorry, I had to backtrack a little bit there. So all our conferences anywhere else in the world are a central conference. Conferences in Africa, conferences in Asia, conferences in Europe, they're all called central conferences. All those jurisdictional and central conferences together make up what we call General Conference. This is a body that meets quadrennially every 4 years, coincidentally the same 4-year cycle as presidential elections in the U.S. The General Conference is one of the 3 branches of the United Methodist Church. Our denomination is set up really strangely like the American government. We have a judicial branch. That's our judicial council. We have an executive branch. That's our bishops, all the bishops from all over the world. And we have our legislative branch, and that is General Conference. But General Conference is the body that speaks for the denomination. So the bishops don't speak for the denomination. The General Conference does, our legislative body. And the way they speak, excuse me, is the production of a book. Oh, I am hearing myself from another part of the room. That's unnerving. This is the document produced by General Conference every 4 years. It's called the Book of Discipline. This is how the denomination runs. This is our polity document. All of our rules, all of our regulations, you can find in here. Maggie's becoming very familiar with this because the whole process of becoming a pastor in the United Methodist Church is outlined here in excruciating detail. How you run your local church, who can be on board of trustees or staff parish, up to how bishops are elected. Everything is in here, and this is the way General Conference speaks. So every time General Conference meets, we amend the discipline, usually with days of fraught discussion and legislation that says, I'd like to make an amendment to the amendment on the substitute amendment. It follows Robert's Rules of Order to an extreme degree. And it is sometimes exhilarating and more times painful to watch as factions work, because politics happens in the church too. So we've got factions and camps trying to outmaneuver each other legislatively. Who knows Robert's rules best, right? We have different agendas showing up in the discipline. So currently, and since 1972, Alice was at the 1976 General Conference. Were you at 72? As a lay member. 1972 was the year that the controversial language made it into the discipline. That is a statement that many of us feel is in contradiction to the statement also made in the discipline that all people are of sacred worth and created by God in God's image and are of sacred worth. But the language that says homosexuality is incompatible with Christian teaching was introduced in 1972. And folks have worked since then to get that language out because it was presented by a small conservative faction in the church and was contentious and not well passed. You know, votes that are very close really need to be taken again, right? Alice will tell you, if you want to know about that experience, they were having people stand up. People were walking around writing names of how people were voting on that legislation. And taking pictures. So, I mean, when I say fraught and contentious, it's only gotten worse. However, General Conference has introduced measures by which people vote secretly and all of that now, but that's the history. The other language that went in then and shortly thereafter with more clauses was that no gay person can be clergy in the church. And later that clergy cannot perform marriage ceremonies for GLBTQIA plus folks. The reconciling movement is one of many movements working to get that language out. We don't believe it is true to the nature of Methodism. We don't believe it's true to the nature of God. And so that's where the reconciling movement comes from and why churches choose to be part of that. We say the discipline is wrong in that regard. Oh, and some other ones too, but I won't get into that. So anyway, since 1972, there's been this fight over human sexuality, right, in the church, with more or less gains on each side and folks really fighting it out. Some nasty factions emerged on every line of that continuum, with increasingly tense General Conference meetings. 2016 General Conference was a train wreck. And that is probably the lightest way I can put that. Those tensions came to a boil. I mean, think about what was happening in the United States in 2016, right? General Conference was in May. We'd just had a new president come in. We'd had sort of a victory of populist voices, a victory of conservative voices in government. And the same thing happened at General Conference. And it was brutal. I mean, General Conference is usually bad. You always have somebody standing up defending the language we oppose with just horrible things about people and sexuality and all of that. But this was worse. It was awful. So at that General Conference, we designated a task force to keep us from having General Conference like that. I mean, we'd end up spending all our time talking about human sexuality, getting nowhere with ministry and mission, and just hurting people in the process. So General Conference 2016 commissioned a task force to explore a way to get the denomination through this issue. What steps could we take to make General Conference more peaceful? What did we need to do in terms of legislation or structure, and whatnot? And then in 2019, so 1 year before the next General Conference was supposed to be called, we had a special General Conference to hear from that task force, which recommended, well, it wasn't a very strong recommendation. So by a vote of 438 to 384, hear that, the denomination strengthened bans on same-sex weddings and self-avowed practicing gay clergy. That vote was so close, it didn't settle anything, and sparked a whole lot of resistance and really began speeding up conversations about a denominational divorce. We need to split. We can't get through this. So our next General Conference was 2020. Guess what happened? COVID. It was postponed to 2021. And then it was postponed to 2022. They will, the Commission on General Conference, so there's a commission organized for this. You can find them in the book. They will be deciding by the end of March whether to postpone again. All right, everybody clear so far? That's a lot. Good? So we're waiting. General Conference is supposed to be August 29th to September 6th in Minneapolis. We don't know whether that's going to happen, and we won't know for another 2 months. In the meantime, there was legislation submitted for 2020, which didn't happen, right? So you have to have legislation, proposed legislation in a certain amount of time before the quadrennial meeting. One of the pieces that was proposed was called the proposal, a protocol for reconciliation and grace through separation. So basically a legislative piece that enables the amicable divorce of the United Methodist Church, conservative from liberal, if you want to put it that way. There are a lot of proposals coming that are still sort of hanging out there, left over from 2020 that never got acted on. This one is the most endorsed by folks on sort of in every camp. This protocol for reconciliation and grace through separation. If you want to look it up, there's a website, which I got a lot of this information from, just to keep my facts straight. It's gracethroughseparation.com, gracethroughseparation.com/legislation. So really, it's just the name of the legislation with a slash in legislation. It will give you you can look at the full text of the proposal, which is really long. Or a summary of the proposal, which is really helpful. So gracethroughseparation.com/legislation if you want to look at that. This was negotiated by a professional mediator outside the church with a theologically diverse group of United Methodists. So this was really, I think, a noteworthy effort. Under this proposal, churches and conferences that support restrictions on homosexuality and gay marriage and ordination can vote to leave with their church property. That's a big deal. And $25 million to form a new traditionalist denomination. It also sets aside $2 million for any other new Methodist denominations. So basically, the people around that table knew that the super conservative branch of Methodism was ready to split. They've been making that noise for a long time. They've been putting those things in place for a very long time. This is the Good News Movement, the IRD, the Institution for Religion and Democracy, several other caucus groups in the conservative traditions banded together to become the Wesleyan Covenant Association. That's what they call it. And they have already expressed that they're going to leave the church, provided the protocol passes. They've already got the structure in place for their new denomination called the Global Methodist Connection. They are having a legislative meeting on May 7th. They already have website, Facebook, they have all the stuff. They're ready to go. Let's see. If the protocol passes General Conference, whenever General Conference is, they are poised to launch like months after. So they're ready to go. They already have their book of discipline written and everything. Questions so far? Yeah. That was written with their folks at the table already knowing that they were planning to leave. And so that was sort of the divorce terms. It's important, that property piece where they could take their property with them is important to know. In the Methodist Church, every congregation, has what's called a trust clause on its property. We don't own our property. I mean, it looks like we own our property. We inhabit our property. But we hold it in trust for the United Methodist Church. or actually for our annual conference. Conference trustee back there's saying I'm saying it right. Okay. So we can't sell our buildings. We can't, I mean, we maintain them, we pay the bills on them, but we don't own them in the sense that we could sell them. Those things have to be an act of the annual conference, which is problematic. When a church wants to disaffiliate with the denomination, they have to go through a lengthy and pretty expensive process to break the trust clause, to get out of the trust clause so that they can either, right, Nate? So they can either sell their property or use it forever. I mean, the conference trustees, like our trustees here in the church, conference trustees, make those decisions. Whether a church can sell, whether we're just going to give it to them, whether we're going to give it to them for the price of breaking the trust clause. It's about $5,000 in New York to break the trust clause, and a lot of time. So the idea that these churches who want to be part of this new denomination can go without the confines of the trust clause, that's huge. I don't even know how legally that gets done, but that's part of the deal. That's part of the divorce terms is $25 million because they've all been part of this denomination. I don't know where we're going to get $25 million from myself, but they get $2 million. They get $2 million because they weren't at that table already formed. Yeah. Doesn't sound fair to me, but I only go as a delegate. I don't make the rules. So the WCA is plugging along, establishing the groundwork for their denomination. There was a theologically very progressive group that announced last year they were going to form a denomination called the Liberation Methodist Church, or I forget. What was it called? Liberation Methodist Connection with an X. But in late 2021, they said, we haven't been able to pull it together. We're really not going to do it. It turns out that when we're not united in one fight, we all have separate things that we want to do. So this is, as some people say, why liberals can't organize, because we all have our own project. So that they are not planning to leave as a separate denomination. Yeah.
I always thought that there was something like in the Protestant, 52 or so numbers of like United Methodist Church, the Baptist Church, whatever. Doesn't this higher organization have any say in what these guys do?
No. Denominations are all independent. There's no governing body over all the Protestant denominations. I mean, we like to say God is over us all, but nope. Nothing above individual denominations. Oh yes, Alan has asked, is there no body, sort of umbrella body over all the Protestant denominations that would have to have something to do with any of this? And the answer is no. Protestant denominations are all independent, individual. Huh? Well, yes, I mean, they're voluntarily part of an affinity group called the Council of Churches. Most of the mainline denominations are. Many of the independents are not. But that's not a governing body. That's an affiliative body. So, yeah, they can't do anything. Okay, so also important to know is that because General Conference is the body that speaks for the church, the delegates to General Conference have the final say on whether this protocol gets passed. And whether it gets passed in its current form is up to the delegates as well. I mean, this whole protocol could be legislated to a completely different animal. The assumption is that because so many people were part of it and so many people from so many camps were part of the organization of it, that it should pass without a problem. But General Conference has a mind of its own, and the delegates do what the delegates do. So that's the wild card. No, that's a 2/3 vote, and then the constitutional changes, because we have a constitution too, just like America. We have a constitution, and so this requires some constitutional changes, to my understand, as I understand it. And so 2/3 of the General Conference body has to approve it, and then it goes back to annual conferences for those pieces of constitutional work that still have to be done. Because when a constitutional change is made by General Conference, each annual conference has to vote by 2/3 to accept it.
Votes on this gay issues were close. They were 45, 55 or something. How
Recently.
is the group going to get to 2/3 majority in approving this potential?
Alan's asking whether, and I didn't repeat his first question, sorry. How does this, is this a simple majority vote or what? And it has to be 2/3. How do we think we're going to get 2/3 to vote for this? And the assumption is, the working theory is that because the most vehement advocacy groups on every side of these traditional fights, we're at the table to hammer this out. And so, like the Wesley Covenant Association, the Good News Movement, the liberal caucuses have all said, we agree with this, right? Because they were at the table. And so the assumption is they will pass it. Yes?
When all the annual conferences vote, you take all the votes and add them together, and then 2/3 have to vote.
Oh, right, sorry.
So no conference can stop it.
No, right, sorry. Okay, so when there's a change to the Constitution, aren't you glad you all don't go to General Conference? Huh. So when there's a change to the Constitution, 2/3 vote, and then the annual conferences, so that the combined votes of all the annual conferences all over the world, 2/3 have to approve for a constitutional amendment. Does that make sense? So an annual conference can't.
So the rest of the world is going to buy in and has to buy in on this too.
Yeah.
What happens here?
Yeah. Well, because we're a global church.
Yeah,
And so
it adds more complexity.
we have been sinfully U.S.-centric for a long, long time, and now conferences and central conferences elsewhere are saying, you haven't been listening to us. It's time that we're part of this. Now, there's been an assumption that there's been sort of an assumption that conferences in traditionally conservative places, like conferences in Africa, conferences in parts of Asia, want the separation. There's this assumption that they will, of course, just go off with the new denomination, the new very traditional conservative denomination. And we're hearing from the Philippines, from conferences in Africa, well, no, we want to stay in the denomination. And so there's conflict and tension in those conferences around that. In fact, there's East Zimbabwe Conference removed its conference lay leader because he was part of the WCA and was sort of, how do I say it, promoting leaving and going with the WCA, and they removed him from his job, his volunteer job. Okay, yeah. Oh, no. The WCA, we've got a question about whether the WCA is the liberal or the conservative group, because we got a little confused. So, and I'm sorry if I haven't been clear. The WCA, the Wesley Covenant Association, they're developing this new traditionalist, very conservative denomination. So they are not on the left side of anything. Right. Well, yes.
Because we have originating traditional.
Right. See, you're getting it. You're getting it. Are they the original traditional or the new traditional? I think you could safely say, without causing too much trouble, that this is sort of a neo-Orthodox movement within the church. sort of new orthodoxy, that this is a group, a strain, a amalgamation of folks who say that Wesley had a more conservative orthodoxy than folks who read Wesley differently. So it comes down to arguments about how we treat the authority of Scripture, where Scripture comes from, and the authority it has, and how we see John Wesley and the beginning of this movement. And there are folks who read both of those very, very conservatively and say that the Methodist Church has wandered away. Folks on the left say, we never wandered away from anything. This is how we read Scripture in John Wesley. So it's this sort of constant tension that has underlaid these fights. So the WCA is on the right, nowhere near the left. They would be shocked. Any other questions? I mean, really, feel free.
Do you have any, even a supposed number of churches in the United States that would change? It feels almost, I have no reason to believe this, but my own feeling is about a third of the church would remain or become traditional, and probably about 2/3 in this country would go to a more
Right. So the question is, do we have a sense of, in the United States at least, how many churches would go with the new traditionalist denomination, the Global Methodist Connection, and how many would sort of stay in what's left of the United Methodist Church? The answer is no. There are no good numbers on that. Another answer is that in Upper New York, we just had a survey that went out to all the churches and all the clergy saying, anonymously, where's your church on this? Have you heard about the protocol, first of all? Have you talked about the protocol, second of all? And third of all, is your church, do you know yet? Are you going to stay? You're going to go? Same of clergy. You're going to stay? You're going to go? The surprising numbers on that, I think I've got that buried so far, I can't pull it back up. But the surprising numbers on that was, first of all, the number of churches that said, we've never heard of the protocol, which is why we're doing this. We've never heard of the protocol. Something like under 300 churches out of almost 900 churches responded in any way. Most said, we're not sure. That was an option. A really small number, I want to say 100 or less. No, it's even less than that, said they were going. I'm sorry, I just whizzed past me the other day and I didn't retain it all. The number of churches that said they would go was like 24 out of those respondents. And then the number of clergy that said they were going to go with the new Global Methodist was like 70. So I found that to be the shocking number. And lots and lots of I don't knows. We don't know. We don't know what our church is going to decide. We don't know. But it was a higher number of clergy than churches. And I find that really interesting. What? Yes, Maggie.
Question on the chat.
Yeah.
Are there any other polity issues besides homosexuality that the WCA wants to leave over? Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Well, to leave over, not necessarily, but they are certainly writing it into their new, are there any portions of the legislation or any part of the discipline besides human sexuality that the WCA wants to leave over? I'm sorry I'm not repeating the questions. The answer is no, not particularly, but the way they are setting up the new denomination, there are a lot of changes. They're not going to require apportionments to the same degree of apportionments. They're not going to elect bishops for life. They're going to put term limits on bishops, which actually surprises me. I thought they would get rid of bishops entirely. So those are two big changes, and you can see that in the summary if you go through there, gracethroughseparation.com, legislation. you can see that.
That those that remain would change or remove the problematic language.
Is there the assumption that those who change or remain would remove the problematic language? Yes, there is. But they can't do it at this general conference. So it has to wait for the next general conference, the 2024, if we haven't postponed past 2024, right? So there is the assumption. There's also part of this protocol language is abeyance. So abeyance of charges against clergy, abeyance of receiving complaints about clergy related to these matters, that the College of Bishops, which is the worldwide group of bishops, has said we're not going to pursue those until we know about the protocol. No, that's not the executive branch going after. So the way that people are removed and complaints and all that goes through the Council of Bishops, right? So yes, there's an assumption that the folks who remain are going to want that language changed, but they can't do it until another general conference, and it's very unlikely they'll sort of. You can stay the rules, you can set the rules aside, but it has to be by a majority vote. There's very little chance that that's going to happen at this general conference where they're going to, I forget the phrase for it, but just sort of set the rules aside and let those who are going to stay continue some legislation, see? Because it's still the whole general conference. The new denomination won't be formed yet. The protocol does not attempt to set anything in place for any of the successor denominations. And they're getting a lot of heat for that, actually, because they didn't say the language would be changed or whatever. But they're very aware of constitutionality, which is where the judicial branch comes in. And is this constitutional? And it is not constitutional to bind a future conference, right? So we cannot tell the successor denominations what to do. Yeah.
It's always the phrase, follow the money. Is there anything involved with what's going on that has to do with money?
Okay. So there's a question about, is there anything to do with any of this that involves money? And, oh yeah. Yes. What's going to happen, the thing that has kept, I think, in my own personal opinion, the thing that has kept the United Methodist Church together so long has been our pension fund for clergy, because nobody could figure out how to deal with that. And so what's going to happen now, if the protocol passes, is that each of these denominations will still use the same pension organization. So we're not splitting up dollars and debts. Now, to leave, I'll get right to you, because I had a question up here first. To leave the denomination, I keep getting closer to you all, and I'm sorry, without the mask. To leave the denomination, a church or a conference will have to pay off its pension liabilities. So lots of conferences and lots of local churches are in arrears on their pastors' pensions. You are not. I'm very proud of you. Thank you. Well, seriously, we've got pastors out there who are living at the poverty line because their conferences did not fund their pensions appropriately. So they'll have to pay those liabilities. They have to pay their debts before they go. And so, yeah, money is huge. That $25 million was not an easy number to come to, nor did it come without a lot of wrangling. So money is there. Let me get pennies, and then I'll come back to you, Marcia.
I might be asking a question that you're going to answer down the road, but when you talk about there being 70 clergy in New York Conference, is that a terrible surprise to me because we have a conservative
Yeah.
conservative
It just surprised me it was more than the churches.
So how's that going to work? Church doesn't want to go
Right.
to the WCA, pastor does.
The question is, if a church wants to go with the WCA to the Global Methodist Connection, the GMC, which I think, yeah, people should check their acronyms before they name things. But a pastor doesn't, or vice versa. It's also possible that an annual conference wants to go to the new denomination, but a church in that conference, or a district. So, yeah, that's ambiguous right now, how that works. Appointments are, the protocol does say that appointments in the meantime are to be made with sensitivity to those kinds of differences. But the process by making that happen, is not yet clear. Yeah. Oh, Marcia, I'll come back to you.
Get their pension, like that will still be together even though the denomination.
Yes, the pension will still be together. Some of the boards, the question is, so people will still get their pensions even if they go off to the new denomination. Yes, that's the idea.
Than 25 million for the split off?
Well, are they getting more than 25 million for the split off? And the answer is no, because the pension goes to the pastors. Okay, that pension board, what? Well, yeah, we've already earned our pensions, so they can't have them. It's funded by current contributions, yes. The split away denomination and the current denomination will continue our practices, but they've covenanted as part of this to continue to fund the pension system. We'll see how long that lasts. I don't know how they're going to handle it in the Global Methodist Church. We'll still have apportionments, I'm sure. Marcia.
Approximately how many delegates would our church, Central United Methodist, have to the General Conference?
Oh, General Conference, they're actually delegates. She asks how many delegates does Central have to the General Conference? And the answer to that is delegates are elected from the annual conferences. And those numbers are chosen proportionally to membership. So General Conference cannot have any more than 1,000 delegates, period. So every annual conference, every central conference, according to their membership, has a portion of those 1,000 members, right? So like in Troy and Wyoming Conference, we had 2 clergy and 2 lay delegates each to General Conference, out of the whole conference. Upper New York, we have, I don't know that, like 10 clergy and 10 lay, maybe a couple less, because the membership numbers tell us how much of that proportion we get. So Central, as a church, sort of shares the delegation with the whole annual conference and all the other local churches. That make sense? Okay. Maggie, was there another question? Okay.
I was wondering if this sort of sharing the pension thing, is that sort of a grandfather clause situation? Like,
yes, the question. The question is that pension sharing, pension agency sharing, grandfathered in, sort of, and yeah. So we don't know what a future General Conference will do or any of that, but right now it's in both denominations' best interests to keep that thing solvent and stable and together.
And Westpath, which is our pension group, has been incorporated separately so
Yes.
that it can continue.
Oh, yes. Thank you.
It doesn't belong to any conference anymore because it's separate and it was done on purpose so that it can continue to serve both.
All right. So my conference trustee husband has just clarified for me, thank you very much, that Westpath, which is our pension board, it used to be known as the Global Board of Pensions and Health Benefits, is now called Westpath, and it is incorporated separately. So the question about apportionments for that, it may just be billing out of Westpath that happens, which is separate from apportionment giving. Our apportionments are the shares that every congregation puts into the pot, because we're a connectional church, to fund boards and agencies like the Board of Global Ministries, like UMCOR, which runs out of the Board of Global Ministries, Board of Discipleship, Board of Pensions, right? Board of Christian Interreligious Concerns. we have several boards and agencies. Board of Church and Society, which is our social action board in Washington, right next to the Supreme Court. So those apportionments, those things we pay as part of our share, fund those larger things. That's how we can do UMCOR, because we fund it out of our apportionments and our giving. Marsh, I did answer your question. Okay. Other questions? I know this is going a little long, but see, it's stuff that all has to be teased out. Yeah, Denise.
What is and there may not be an answer yet, but what is the plan for each church making the decision which way they want to go?
Right. Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah. Thank you. The question is, what is the plan for each church who wants to make a decision about this? Nate, have the trustees talked about this at all?
Well, it depends if the protocol passes.
Should I give you the mic so I don't have to rephrase you? I have the hand mic up here. No, I don't. I took it back. Oh, no, I have it. Sorry. Oh, I'm so glad my husband loves me. Can you turn on the hand?
Am I on? Okay, so we don't really know what's going to happen. So if the protocol passes, then the conference trustees are going to have a lot of work to do quickly because we don't know what the rules are going to be. There's already a protocol for leaving. That already exists. It was done at the 2016 conference, but it's an extraordinarily expensive prospect to leave as a church because in addition to unfunded liabilities that you have for your own pastors, there's also conference structural liabilities that have to be dealt with. And to leave now, you have to pay every share of that you ever had from all of history. And almost no church has those kinds of funds.
Theoretically, the protocol makes it easier and more streamlined and less expensive for a church to choose to go to a newly established denomination. But none of that is set yet.
So if a church decides to go to a successor conference under the protocol, they don't have to pay that up front because they're still going to be in a denomination. And so the denomination will hold some of that debt for probably ever, because that's the way it seems to work. It keeps rolling over. But if you leave to become independent, you have to pay all of that up front because you're not going to be part of a conference. So we already have a protocol. We already have some churches that are trying to go out that way, and what they're finding is that they're going to bankrupt themselves. So they're now waiting for this protocol. But if they think they're going to be able to go and be independent, they're not going to be able to because they're going to have to still pay that. So we really haven't started talking about what's going to happen with the protocol because
it has to pass first.
And it's probably not going to pass in the state that it's in right now. I mean, almost no chance. I've never seen anything this big and complicated go to General Conference and get passed as it is. So
thank you. Thank you very much. And that leads me actually to sort of the final point I wanted to make. See, there is an end to all this, I promise. Is that every church is going to have to make some sort of decision, whether it's to stay in the United Methodist Church, which will continue past this divorce. I hate that language for it, but it really, I mean, with all the legality and all the complication, that's really the best metaphor for this. Or to go with the Global Methodist Connection Church, which is that new traditionalist, old, very traditional, very conservative branch of Methodism. Or to become independent, which, as Nate said, is just not really going to be easy. Or to affiliate with another denomination. There are United Methodist churches that have already started affiliating with the United Church of Christ, for example. So, that decision is in front of every single United Methodist church in the world. It all hinges on this protocol. It all hinges on this legislation and how it gets amended or changed, and how we manage the implementation both in the new denomination and the United Methodist Church. So for a while there I was calling it the leftover United Methodist Church. But no, we are the United Methodist Church. It's the breakaways who are breaking away. So we are the United Methodist Church.
In the South that feel exactly the opposite of that they have with the tradition and they want to keep the tradition and that they're being kicked out because they want to keep the tradition.
Yeah, and it's all in perspective and spin and how we talk about and look at things. Yeah. Other questions? Really, that's about all I have. There are conferences doing some work along the lines of the protocol. So, arguments about human sexuality are heating up again. The bishops have shared a vision for the continuing United Methodist Church, which says something, but not a lot, but also commits them to living into a more inclusive Christianity. The North Central jurisdiction has just approved a covenant for the future that welcomes and affirms gay people, and that covenant is being challenged by church law. David Bard is the Bishop of Michigan who was presiding at that. He allowed that legislation to happen. He was challenged by one of the leaders of the WCA to a ruling, a judicial ruling, which means an action of a bishop is submitted to the judicial council for the judicial council to say if that was legal. They said it was. Iowa Conference has passed legislation allowing same-gender weddings in their churches, and they're being challenged on that. So, and the East Zimbabwe thing. So that's what I've got so far. That's the basic. That's the underpinnings of all of this and what is in front of the denomination. And it is big and heavy stuff. And I'm aghast at the churches that don't know it's even out there, that their clergy or their lay leaders have not talked about this at all, because this is enormous stuff. Any other questions? Yeah, Marcia.
I heard on TV that Pope Francis made some remarks about the LGBT community and that parents shouldn't be, I can't remember his exact words, but shouldn't be too hard on their kids, if they go in that direction. But he was conciliatory, but I didn't really feel that his words were that positive.
These conversations are happening in every faith tradition in the world right now. And the Pope, Marcia's mentioning the Pope's comments about parents of gay, lesbian, transgender, bisexual children being accepting. In other words, not disowning or kicking out or condemning their children for their homosexuality or their bisexuality, whatever. And so there are folks in the Catholic Church who think he didn't say enough, and folks in the Catholic Church who think he says too much. It's the same in every faith tradition, right? This is hot. This is the thing right now that is dividing faith traditions and people of faith. So, I'm glad he said something. I wish he'd said more, but that's my opinion.
His exact words.
Yeah. It was basically about splintering families.
Trying hard to put a positive spin on it, but it really, I got the feeling that if I were an LGBT person, I wouldn't feel it was enough.
Right. And that's how a lot of folks are taking that. Other questions at all? Do you have any? Nate, you're standing there like you want to say something. No, okay. He wants to go have lunch. He's cooking, so, Any other questions at all? Did this help? Is this helpful in any way? Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, stay tuned. We're going to have a few more of these as we get closer to the scheduled date of General Conference. And I will be keeping you posted on if that gets postponed or what other legislative stuff is coming up. There'll be legislation submitted for that General Conference that may stand in complete contrast to the protocol. So who knows? It's a wild card. thanks for coming and listening to my TED Talk. Thanks for staying, everybody. Think?